Part 8, Egg Hunt. Alright, so in the last part, we learned how to use events to basically make something happen when something happens in the Minecraft world. We can make something else happen. We're going to use events here, and we're going to add on some new things we're going to learn. But this one's a bit different because we're going to make a mini game. The mini game is called Egg Hunt, and you'll see how it works in just a moment. And I figured it'd be good to demonstrate this one because it's a bit more complicated than the other scripts we've done. So we won't build this one up without actually seeing it first. So I'm standing on a block of yellow wool here. Basically, the way this works is you'll have two teams, red and yellow. People will stand on either the red or yellow sets of wool, and then the game starts by typing JSP egg hunt. Okay, and an egg hunt is starting, and there are a whole bunch of chickens over here. So the game is set to last for 15 seconds. As I start collecting eggs, you can see my score is going up on the right. If there were more than one player playing, then you'd see their scores on the right there too. That is a scoreboard. Oh, and the game has finished. It says yellow has vanquished red 19-0. That's because there was nobody on the red team. The MVP was me with 19 eggs, and it told me I found 19 eggs. So that's the game. And let's take a look at how this game is built up. And of course, it's a lot more fun with multiple players, but right now this was just me. All right, so let's start making our egg hunt script. I'm going to create a new file in Scriptcraft plugins called egghunt.js. All right, and the first thing we'll start with, let's see, well, we know we've got our globals. We know we're going to use require. We also know we're going to use command. So let's start with the command. It's actually kind of the last thing that will be in the file, but it's sort of the first thing we'll need to play around with. So command takes parameters and a player. Okay, so this is our command. I think it would be a good idea if the command makes sure that there's only one egg hunt in progress at a time. And we're also going to need a place to hang on to information. So what we'll do is we'll make a game data object, and we will say if game data is set, then tell the player that there's already a game in progress. And then return, and without doing anything. So we obviously aren't setting game data to anything right now. When we just say var game data with nothing here, that means it's just an empty variable. That's okay for now. Something else I'll introduce you to is there's a global object called server that has a number of features on it. One is server.broadcast message. So basically when we do echo, that's sending a message to the player who ran the command. When we do server broadcast message, it's going to send it to everybody. So we want to let everybody know that an egg hunt is starting. All right, and then one other thing that we need to know is the game is going to start, but the game also needs to come to an end somewhere. So let us define a game length variable, and we will set that to 10 seconds. Okay, so game length is going to be the number of seconds. Let's even add a comment there. Number of seconds, just so that somebody coming here will know what that is. Okay, so there's a function called setTimeout that we are given for free in here. So setTimeout, it takes a function. As you can see, we're getting a hint here. It takes a function, and that's going to be what happens when this timeout is done. And then there's going to be a number of milliseconds. So a millisecond is 1,000th of a second. So we will have a finish game function that we'll create. Doesn't exist yet, but we'll create it. And we've got a game length variable. Now that game length is in seconds, and this is asking for milliseconds. So that means that if it's 10 seconds, we multiply by 1,000, and that will give us how many milliseconds. So it'll be 10,000 milliseconds before this finish game function is called. And we can put a stub here for that function, finish game, and we'll come back to that because we'll have to build this up bit by bit. So let's see. One thing I think would be fun to do is to start by creating all those chickens. So let's take a look at how we create those chickens. Now there's a module in Scriptcraft already called spawn. It provides a you can do JSP spawn cow or JSP spawn chicken. So this will give us some information about what we need in order to do that. So let's see. We can see that it's referring to an entity type here. And then world. Oh wait, no, this is okay. So this is one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at Scriptcraft's code, is that Scriptcraft works with something called Canary Mod, which we're used to, which is a modifiable Minecraft server. It also works with another one called Bucket or Craft Bucket. So we need to make sure that whenever we're taking some code from Scriptcraft, we need to make sure that we're looking at the Canary code. So you can see that it gets a Canary object, and then it creates an entity using this thing here. So this gives us an idea, and then it calls entity.spawn. Okay, so and one of the things also you can see when it's creating a new entity, it takes the entity type and a location. So we'll need to put these chickens somewhere. By the way, I just pressed Control Tab, and that switched between the two files. And I pressed Command Shift O on my Mac here. It would be Control Shift O on the Windows to get to that spawn spawn.js. Okay. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to call a function called spawn chickens. And for now, for the location, let's just pass in player.location, because the player that's being called in. So basically it's going to spawn all these chickens right around the person who ran the egg hunt command. All right, so let's see, function spawn chickens. Oh, and that takes a location. Okay, so let's take a look at what spawn chickens looks like. So let's see, we need the entity factory equals, let's see, canary.factory.entity factory. So this is, if we look back in spawn, this canary.factory.entity factory. So I'm just pulling this out into variable because we're going to be spawning a bunch of chickens, not just one. So having that entity factory in hand will be very handy indeed. Now one of the things is that canary is not defined, so we can define that up here. We haven't been importing anything yet, so let's go ahead and do that in here. Canary equals packages.net.canarymod. Whoops, it helps to spell it correctly. Canary mod dot canary. Okay, so that gives us the canary variable. And then what we need to do here is we need to keep track of, we also need to keep track of the chickens we've spawned, because we could spawn all these chickens and then there would be a whole bunch of chickens left over when the game is done, and that's no fun. So let's create a variable for chickens, and we'll say chickens is a new array, because we're going to basically keep a list of chickens. So for every chicken we create, we're going to just add it to this list. We'll see how we do that in a moment. Okay, so remember we did for loops before, so for I equals 0, we're going to start with 0 because that's the way we generally write our for loops. Let's do a variable for chicken count. so that this is easily changed. Game length is 10 seconds. And chicken count. So you can see I changed that semicolon at the end there to a comma, and I'm adding a chicken count. Let's see. Let's start with 20 chickens just to keep things simple and relatively light on the computer. The more chickens you create, the more work the computer has to do to keep track of those chickens. Okay, so we'll create 20 chickens. And then, so I is less than chicken count. I++. So again, for loop. So we start. This is our starting point. This is the check that it does every time. So make sure that I is less than chicken count before running this loop, and then I++ means add 1 to I. And it does that at the end of each loop. All right. So I'm going to create a copy of that location so that I can change it without changing that original location object, because we're going to be basically putting the chickens in random places around the player, around that location that was passed in. Now, how do I know there's a location.clone? It's an excellent question. The reason I know there's a location.clone is because that's a Java object, and I happen to know that Java objects have clone on them. That's not very good, but it's just the way things work. That as you learn these things, you can do more. But a more useful way is, let me show you this. If we do a search here for canary mod location. All right, let us see if we can go to the location. Okay, so when I Googled it, it found this net canary mod API world position location that is actually the object that we're looking at, but this says uses of class, which means it's not actually, this is the places where this is used, not the real one. But if I click this one here, this is actually a link to the location object. So this gives us a lot more information. Now we're looking at what is on a location object. We can see that a location object has a few things that are going to come in handy for us, but primarily we can see that it's got X and Y that it's storing. We're going to want to use that. You can see that comes from a position, set X, set Y. You might remember from previously we talked about how you can get rid of the get and set word and not call it as a function. You can just use it like it's a variable on there. And then you can also see here's the clone that I was talking about. Okay, so that gives us a way to basically make a copy of a location and make sure that we don't overwrite what we're trying to do, overwrite the previous one. All right, so new location. We're going to basically stick it in a random spot. New location.x plus equals math.floor. So we're going to do a little bit of math here. Basically what we want to do is move the X position and the Y position of this chicken. Remember, this is three-dimensional space, which means we have X, Y, and Z. So if you haven't used geometry, that's the thing about games, is that you have a bit of math you need to do sometimes for figuring out where things belong. And that's what we're doing here. So math.floor, again, just rounds down. So if it's 3.5 or 4 or 4.5, it'll round down to 3 or 4. So math.random is a function. So I call that, and it will give us a random number. Now the way math.random works, it gives you a random number between 0 and 1. Okay, so if you multiply that, it's like a percentage basically. So if you multiply that by some other number, it will give you some percentage of that number. So let's make another variable, and this is going to be chicken location variation is what I want to call it. So chicken location variation, and I'll set that to 10, and that's going to be the number of blocks. Oops, that semicolon belongs over here before the comment. So what we're going to do is make it so that the chickens can be plus or minus 5 blocks. So it'll be 10 blocks this way or that way from the original location. Okay, so all I need to do to get that plus or minus 10, say chicken location variation. Okay, so that would mean it'll be basically a number between 0 and 10. So I'm going to go and subtract five from that. Okay, so what this means is that basically if it's 0 to 5, it will turn out to be a negative number. And if it's 5 to 10, it will turn out to be a positive number. So that means it's going to be either 5 to the right or 5 to the left. Okay, and then we just want to do the same thing for the y variable. So new location dot y equals that whole thing again. Okay, so now we have the location that we want the chicken to be in. Okay, so we create the chicken itself using the entity factory that we got there. New entity. Okay, now we need an entity type. Where do we get the entity type from? Well, let's look back at spawn here. Entity type. Okay, so basically it's referring to this packages.net.canarymod.entity type thing. I'm going to copy and paste that over here. So it's basically something we're sort of importing. We can say that chicken equals that dot chicken. Okay, because the way these entity types work is that they're basically just what they call an enumeration. It's a collection of constants, you could say. It's just a value that it keeps track of. And so we look up the chicken value in there. And so I put that chicken value here. And then we need to give it the location. So the location of this chicken is new loc. Okay. And then we add this chicken to our list using push. So there's a push function on arrays in JavaScript, and what that does is it adds that chicken to the end of the list. Okay. Now, one of the other things that we need to do, well, actually, you know what? We'll come back to the eggs. For now, we'll just add chickens. So we spawn our chicken, and again, this is something that we see straight in this spawn. You call entity.spawn, it will spawn it, and that is exactly what we're doing. Chicken, whoops, not chickens.spawn. There's a typo here. It should be chicken.spawn because we want to spawn that particular chicken that we just created. So again, this in brief, this is figuring out the location of the chicken. It's calling new entity to create the chicken itself. It adds the chicken to our list, and then it spawns it. Okay, so we're keeping track of all these chickens that we're creating. All right, now one of the things we want to make sure we do is at the end of the game, we should clean up those chickens because we don't want, all these chickens running around forever. So first we just make sure that a game is actually running and we didn't somehow call this with a game not running. So if there are chickens, there's a utils thing that Canary Mod, utils modules, not a thing, utils module that Canary Mod gives us. So we use that because it has a handy for each function in it. So for each, what we want to do is for each chicken in the chickens list that we kept track of, we create a function that's going to get called for each of those chickens. So it's going to loop through those chickens one by one and call this function for each one of them. And so the function is getting a chicken in. Now it happens that chickens, so how will we know this? Let me pop over here again to my browser window. How do we get rid of a chicken? This would be the next question. So I can go back to the overview, and basically, if we look at entity, living, animal, I click on chicken. So we see there's a whole bunch of stuff. Set time until next egg. That's very chicken specific. And I can imagine that's going to be very handy for us very soon. But we will come back to that. These are things for entity.living, or sorry, entity living, and then entity. So just kind of working my way, you can see that there's all kinds of different things that you can call on a chicken, because it basically gets all of these things from entity animal, entity living, living base, and entity. All the way down on entity, though, we can see there is a destroy method, and that is what we need to use. So we call chicken.destroy. All right. And then once we have destroyed that chicken, so basically this is going to get called for each chicken in our list. And so for each chicken, it's going to destroy it. So now we're done. And so we're done with that. So we can just reset. We can basically set our chickens list to null. So our chickens list is done. I also noticed that we have errors here. Packages, echo, and set timeout are not defined. We can easily fix that by just adding them, because those are all globals. Packages, echo, set timeout. All right. So let's see what we've got going here. We have, we come into our egg hunt. We broadcast the message starting an egg hunt. We set a timeout for the game length, which is set in seconds. And we call finish game when that's over. In the meantime, though, before the game is over, we're going to spawn the chickens by doing that in the player's location. Okay, and then canary.factory, entity factory, and we keep on going through. Looks good to me. Let's see what we get when we try it out. All right. Oh, it's raining. Good thing I made that rain command. Okay, so let the rain clear up a bit here. And we will refresh so we have access to our new command here. JSP egg hunt. Okay, so whoop, there are our chickens. Oh, they seem to be falling from the sky. Okay, oh, and look at that. We've got chicken feathers and chickens. What did I do wrong? Well, I'll tell you what I did wrong. So that didn't work out. Oh, one thing that did work out, though, is that, remember all those chickens it just created? They're gone. They went away 10 seconds later, just like we wanted. But why did a bunch of our chickens die? It's because I set new location X and new location Y was what I set. It should actually be new location.z. So X and Z are basically right, left, backward, forward, and Y is going to be up and down. So let us try this again. So I save that, go back to the game, refresh, and then run our egg hunt. Oops, did I just type the right thing? Oh, I did. Starting an egg hunt. Oh, okay, it just took a second. And this time you can see our chickens are happy and healthy. They are running around on the ground, and then they all disappeared, just like that. All right, so next, let us do a little bit of setup. We'll create a function called setup scoreboard. We're not going to actually create the scoreboard just yet. We'll come back to that. The scoreboard is what sits on the side. But what we do want is we want right now to set up our teams. So let's at least keep track of that. So game data is going to be an object. We've talked about objects before. Again, they just hang on to properties and their values. So we create a new object, and that object will keep track of scores. So there'll be scores for each player. player teams. Okay, so the scores is going to be an object, and you'll see how we use that soon. Player teams is going to be another object that's basically going to keep track for each player what team they're on. We also want to keep track of team scores. Now we're only going to have 2 teams in this, and it's going to be red and yellow. Okay. We also remember from our original that we wanted to keep track of who the most valuable player is. And so to keep track of that, we need to know what the most valuable player's score was, and we need to know who the most valuable player was. Up front, we don't know, so we'll just say no one. But as soon as somebody scores, we will change that. We'll update that. Okay, so this is basically what's going to store our game data, and so when we're going to set that up, we will do that before the chickens are spawned. So we'll say set up scoreboard, and we call that because it's a function. Now one of the things that would be good to do also, it's not that we're actually setting up game data. When you finish the game, we should basically say game data equals null. I should say that null, I haven't really talked about null. Null is an empty value in JavaScript. So we're basically just sort of emptying that out, throwing it away. Okay, so when the game is done, the game data from the previous game is thrown away. Okay, so once we've set up the scoreboard, one of the other things we want to do is set up the teams. That'll be our next bit. Okay, so function set up teams. So one of this utils module that Scriptcraft has is really handy. Let us find it. Utils. Utils module. Okay, utilities module. Very useful utility functions, and there are indeed many. So this is why it's useful to go through the Scriptcraft documentation, because you'll find all kinds of things that you're able to do. So one of the things we're able to do is use this. Utils.player returns a player object. So you can request a given player. But we don't need a given player. We need to be able to actually look at all of the players, because what we're going to do to set up these teams is we need to look through all of the players and see which people on the server are standing on wool, because that's the way this works, right? Is if you're standing on wool, it then needs to look at the color of that wool to find out what team you're on. So here's the utils.players function. Okay, it returns a JavaScript array of all the players in the server, or you can pass in a function that's going to be called with each player as a parameter. All right, let's give that a try. So we'll say utils.players, and we'll pass it a function, and that function is going to get a player. All right, so for each player in the game, this function is going to get called so that it can do something with that player. All right, so the first thing we need to do is find out, is that person standing on wool? Okay, so we know players have a location. Okay, so we find out their location. Then remember y is up and down. So if we say location.y minus equals 1, minus equals is just like plus equals. That means subtract 1 from location.y. So that means that we're going to be looking at the block 1 below where the player is standing. Another useful function in here, let me find it, there it is the block at function. Okay, so we know the location of this block that we care about, but we don't know what that block is. So this will let us find that out. So we say var block equals utils.blockAt loc, and that is basically this this location that we've just figured out. Okay, so now we have a block in hand. How do we find out what that is? How do we find out some way of recognizing, is that block wool? Well, let us take a look in here there are blocks. Okay, so I found blocks, Canary Mod API world blocks. I find a block here. Let's see what we might be able to do with a block that could tell us something about it. No, I don't see anything here. Unless there's a... Oh, there's a block type. Okay, well, let's take a look at block type. Is that going to tell us anything about it? Okay, well, there are all these different types of blocks in block type. Oh yeah, and then there's this, get machine name. Returns a machine readable name. I guess we can see what that does. Let's see. So I'm back in Minecraft, and I've got a wool block here that I'm looking at. Actually, why don't I stand on it? So sometimes it really is quite handy to just try things out in here. So I can say loc equals self.location. Okay, and I can then say loc.y minus equals 1. And we're basically just doing exactly what I'm doing in that script. Require utils. Okay, so now I can say utils dot or block equals utils dot block at loc. So that's pretty much exactly what we just did in our script. Okay, so now I have a block. Oh, and you can see type equals Minecraft :wool. So let's see, block dot type dot machine name. That's what I was just looking at. Minecraft :wool. Well, that's good enough. We can do something with that. So let's go back to brackets, and we can say if block dot type dot machine name. If it's not wool, Minecraft :wool. Remember, that's what the string said. So if it's not equal to Minecraft :wool. Oh yes, not equal to. I should notice that this exclamation point equals means not equal. So equals means equal, and then use an exclamation point to mean not. Okay, so for that player, so this is a player who is not standing on wool. So we're going to tell them you are not playing Egg Hunt because you are not on wool. All right, and we return. We return from this. We're returning from this function inside here, which means that that player is not playing. So we don't do anything more with that particular player. So now we need to find out what color is that wool. Let's see. So I go back to block. Is there something we can do for block? Is there something on block that's going to tell us anything about it? Well, I don't see anything. Maybe there's something else about a block of wool they would know. Okay, I know what we do. We go back to Minecraft and we look at what we have on that block object. How about that? Block.get get properties. Okay, well, oh, look at that. There's a property there that equals yellow. Well, that's what we want. Block dot oh look, and there's a function there called get property for name. Now this sometimes you can make a lucky guess. And I'm going to say we want to look up a property called color because it seems like a logical name for that property. And it returned this thing, this object. It's an enumerated property. Let's see if we can figure out what that is. So I'm going to say block.get properties for property for name color, color obj. I'm just going to say color obj for color object. So color obj. Now one of the things, what does this have on it? This has get native, get name, value class, get value class. Oh, maybe it's another way around. Get value for color obj. Oh, okay. Well, that looks easier to deal with. Now that is not actually the string yellow. That is an object itself. So we want block.getValue color obj. So all objects in JavaScript and Java both actually have a toString method on them that will return a string value, a string representation of it. So I can call toString. JavaScript on strings has two lowercase, so we get a nice, easy to read yellow string. So that's something we can work with here. So I'm going to go back in here and say var color equals block.get property for name color. Okay, so that gives us that object that represents colors. And then we want to get the value, wool color. Block.getValue color. So that's what I was calling color obj. toString, to lowercase. So when we do that, wool color is going to be equal to either, well, it's going to be equal to whatever color wool they're standing on. So this doesn't actually care if they're standing on red or if they're standing on yellow, or they could be standing on another color of wool, but we're only going to keep track of red and yellow, so they won't get counted properly if they're not on red or yellow. Okay, so we have a player, they're standing on wool, so we're going to add them to our game data. Game data.scores, remember keeping track of the scores, so the scores for that player, we'll store them by name in this object. So for me, it's Gremlin Seeker, so I can say player game data.scores, and that's going to be keyed on Gremlin Seeker, and that's 0. So we're going to set my score to 0. Game data.player teams. So for me, the team that I'm on is my wool color. And that's going to be true for everybody. The team that they are on is going to be their wool color. And then we'll let the player know you are on the plus wool color plus another string team. So it will tell me that you are on the yellow team. That's what it will say to me. And you can see that it's echoing this to that player. So only that player is going to see that particular message. All right, so when we run this, what should happen, if I'm standing on the wool, well, if I'm not standing on the wool, I should see this message. If I'm standing on the wool, I'll see this message. Let's give that a try. So we refresh, and I will step off the wool just to try that version. JSP egg hunt. Okay, starting an egg hunt. You are not playing egg hunt because you are not on wool. That was exactly what we wanted it to do. And in a couple of seconds, chickens are gone. Egg hunt is over. Okay, let's try it again. I'm on the wool now. Starting an egg hunt. You are on the yellow team. So there we go. We have the ability to set up teams and set up the player scores. All right, so the next thing I want to do is make it so that the chickens will spawn the eggs, will create eggs soon. And what do I mean by soon? So what I mean by soon is I want them to create eggs within some amount of time after it starts. So one of the things about this, let's go back to our documentation for chickens. Overview, entity, living animal, chicken. So set time until next egg. It says it takes an integer time ticks. Time in ticks, there are about 20 ticks per second until the chicken lays the next egg. Okay, so I think we will have a variable here called egg timer, which is going to be just that. It is the timer for when the eggs are going to come. And basically what we want is probably within 3 seconds, say. So that'll be about 60 ticks. Let's see, whoops. So time in ticks, not tickets, ticks, 20 per second. Okay. So that means it'll be about 3 seconds, but we want it to be random again. So let's go back to our spawn chickens. So here's where we're creating our chickens. When we create a chicken, we will want to call on it set time until next egg. Okay, math.floor, we'll use that again because we're going to use random again, and we want an integer to come out of this. Okay, so we create a random number, and it's going to be a random number up to the egg timer amount. So somewhere between 0 and 60 is what we're going to end up with. And that's how many ticks it's going to take. So it'll take somewhere between 0 and 3 seconds for each of those chickens that we create to lay an egg. And this random is just, nice little bit of variation, keeps it interesting. Okay, set time until next egg. So now the chickens are going to, it's going to create all these eggs. One of the things that we don't want is for players to start with eggs and then basically just toss them back down and pick them up. We don't want them to end with eggs either, because when they pick up the eggs, they're going to have all these eggs in their inventory, and we don't want that. So let's create a function that we can use at the beginning and the end to basically get rid of the eggs that the players have. So hopefully they didn't have any eggs that they care about, because we're going to get rid of them. Clean up eggs. Okay, so we want to clean up the eggs of the players. Basically means deleting them, removing them. Players. So again, we're going to loop through all of the players that are playing the game. But you know what? We only want to do this to the players who are, not just all the players on the server. We want to do this only to the players who are playing this game. How do we do that? Game data. Well, we can look in our game data at scores, player.name. Okay, so if we look up that player's name in scores, there should be a value in there. Now, one of the things JavaScript has, one of the funny things about JavaScript is that if we were to just say this, it would look in there and see if there's a player there. But if the value is 0, JavaScript counts that as false. 0 is the same as false. So we want something that's going to be true if the player is there. So if it's not undefined, so JavaScript has this notion of undefined. So if you look up a value, if you look up a key on an object, and it's not there, then JavaScript returns undefined. And so we can just say, if the scores for this player is not undefined, then we're going to loop through all of the eggs that player has. How do we get the eggs that the player has? And what do we do with them once we get them? Well, here we want to look at our inventory. So let's say self.inventory. So So this is all the stuff we have on there. So one of the things I can do is look at, there's a has item method on inventory. So I can say, oh wait, we need items for this. Items is a module. We've seen that one before. Okay, so self.inventory.hasItem items.egg true. Okay, so I do indeed have an egg in my inventory. That's what we want to know. So how can we get rid of it? Well, let's see, self.inventory.remove item. Okay, so I can actually say remove item items.egg. Let's try that. Okay, so the egg went away. All right, so let us go back here. So we're going to introduce something else new from JavaScript. There is a statement, there's a keyword called while. So what it does is it's going to do another kind of loop, and it's going to keep on looping while something is true. Now the dangerous thing about while is it can be very easy to accidentally get yourself in an infinite loop where there's nothing that stops it. So we don't want that. So we want to do while player.inventory.hasItem items.egg. Okay, so we saw this, that as long as we have an egg in our inventory, it will be true. But once we don't have any egg anymore, it's not going to be true. So the reason we need to do this in a while loop is, let's say we have multiple slots filled up with eggs. The remove item, I happen to know just because I experimented with it, remove item only removes a single slot worth of eggs. So we need to keep on removing until all the eggs are gone. So player.inventory.remove items.egg. Okay, so as long as the person has eggs, it's going to remove them. So it will automatically, as soon as it's done removing them all, it will automatically stop that loop, which is what we want. Okay, items is not defined. Oh, that's right. We need to import that up here. Items require items. Okay, so that error goes away. Now we haven't called this anywhere. So let's do a clean up eggs at the beginning of the game, and then at the end of the game, we also want to again clean up the eggs, because there's going to be a whole bunch of eggs. Now, any eggs that were left behind by the chickens at the end of the game, they will still be there, because those eggs are all separate objects. They are separate things of themselves. So we're cleaning up our chickens, but we're not really cleaning up our eggs. At this point, there's nothing, I couldn't find an easy way to fix that, so we just have to deal with it. All right, let's give it a try. JS refresh. So what we should expect to see, I'll just stand over here. We should expect to see a bunch of chickens come up, and we should see them lay a bunch of eggs, and we should be able to pick them up, and then we should see the eggs go away from my inventory. Okay, so here are the chickens, and the eggs have started coming out. There are lots of them, so I'm picking up the eggs. Got 14 of them already. 16, the game will end soon. Chickens are gone, and my eggs are gone from my inventory. Yep, and there's one of those eggs left over. There's another egg left over here. But yeah, so that new piece of code worked exactly like we wanted. So the next step is we need to actually count those eggs so that we can actually score them, so we have something to go by. So how will we know when an egg is picked up? Let us head into our scriptcraft documentation, and let's look for pickup. Let's try that again here. Pickup. Oh, okay, item pickup. That sounds like what we want. So a function which is called whenever the player.itemPickUp hook event is fired. Okay, so this will be called with an event that gives us the item and the player. That sounds like what we want. let's take a look. So we will need to create another function here. Function item pickup book event. Okay, so the item that's returned is an entity item. Okay, let's find out what we can do with that. Entity item equals event.getItem. Okay, and then let's take a look at what an entity item is. An entity item, oh, okay, well, this actually has a get item on it. So that is what we want, and this is something, again, I actually figured this out through trial and error. It took me a little bit of figuring out just by looking at this documentation and then checking what Minecraft was coming up with by adding server.broadcast messages. But anyway, I'm going to say item equals entity item dot get item. Okay, so that is going to give us the actual item. So now we have an item in hand. What do we have on there? Oh, well, this looks handy. Get display name. Okay, so if we have an egg, let's see. So self.inventory dot item in hand, okay, dot display name is an egg. Okay, so that's something we can easily check for. So back here we say if item.displayName is egg, okay, so we've reached this condition where we know we have a player, they've picked up, where we have a user, actually it could be anybody, but they've picked up an egg. Let's find out who that user is. Player name equals event.getPlayer. Again, this was something that we saw in our documentation over here. On the event, we get the player object from who picked it up. Okay, and we get their name. Scores is game data.scores. Now, the reason I'm hanging on to scores as a local variable is I'm going to use it a few times, so it's handy to have it in hand like that. So if scores for that player name, okay, so if that's not undefined, so again, this is what we just did to figure out, is this person actually playing the game? Then what we'll do is we're going to add scores player name plus equals 1. We've done this a few times before, so we're just going to add 1 to that score. Okay, so let's find out. Let's hang on to what their player's score is now. Scores player name. So this is their new score. Okay, if the score is greater than the MVP score. Okay, so remember we start the MVP score at 0. So for that first egg that gets picked up, as long as their score is greater than 0, they will become the new MVP. And this also means that if there's a tie, the first player to reach a certain score is going to be the one that is the MVP. So if their score is greater than the MVP score, then we set game data.mvp to player name. So that player is the new MVP. And we need to make sure that we also update that MVP score to that player's score. So whatever the new high score is becomes the new MVP score to match. Okay, so we have now updated the player score. We've updated who the MVP is. We need to also keep track for the team. Whoops, game data, that should be, sorry, game data team scores like that. Game data.team scores, game data.player teams. So remember, we kept track of which team each player is on in this player teams object. So we look up this current player who picked up the egg. We look them up in player teams to find out their team. Then we look up their team scores, and then we add 1 to the team score. So that means for each player on a given team who collects up eggs, their team will get more scores or more points. Okay, and yeah, that's it. We now have the ability to keep track of the team scores, keep track of the MVP, and all that. So let's display this information. And we display it at the end of the game. So let's go back to our finish game function here. Before we do our cleanup stuff, let's see. Oh, yes. We need to wire up this item pickup hook before I forget to do this. The way we need to do this is we're going to want to also unwire this pickup hook. When you register an event, if you don't want to listen to it forever, which we don't in this case, we only want to listen to it while the game is going on. That means that we need to keep track of the listener that we have. So we'll say item pickup listener. We'll set up a variable for that. And down here, we're going to start listening for that event. Item pickup listener equals events.item pickup. Oh, of course we haven't imported events, but we'll get an error for that and we'll fix it. Item pickup hook. Okay, so again, we learned this last time. Events.item pickup is going to call this function whenever the item pickup event happens. It's going to call our item pickup hook function. It's going to return this object that gives us the ability to unregister it at the end of the game. So let us, if I save, I'm going to get an error because events is undefined. So let's import events. Okay, cool. So let's see. Now we need to, at the end of the game, we need to make sure we clean up our item pickup listener. So just as this if statement here is just to make sure that we're actually running a game. If we don't do this kind of thing and we made a mistake in our code, there's a greater chance that we're going to crash something. So if we check to see that we have an item pickup listener, if we do, we will unregister it. This is in the documentation for events in Scriptcraft. Okay, and then we can set that to null because we're done with that variable. All right, so now is our time to print out the results of the game. Okay, so red score equals game data dot team scores dot red. Yellow score is game data dot team scores dot yellow. So if the red score is greater than the yellow score, that means that red won, and that's something that we should tell the whole world about. So we'll broadcast that red has triumphed over yellow. All right, and why don't we tell everybody how the score is played out? So red score to yellow score. Okay, so it's going to say red has triumphed over yellow, and let's say red got 15 and yellow got 10. It would say 15 to 10. All right, but what if red didn't win? What if they tied? Else if red score triple equals yellow score. Okay, so if their scores are equal, then we'll just say it's a tie. It's a tie. Plus red score. It doesn't matter whether I use red score or yellow score here because they're the same. Red score all. So if they both got 15, say it's a tie, 15 all. All right, so if red didn't win and yellow, or it wasn't a tie, that means yellow won. So we just use else server broadcast message. Yellow has vanquished red. Okay, and then just like we did for the other one, we will say this time yellow score comes first to add score. Okay, so now we have said who the winner is and what the winning score was. Let's also announce who the MVP of the game was. Server.broadcast message. The MVP was GameData.mvp with GameData.mvp score plus eggs. Okay. So it'll say the MVP was your name with 15 points, or 15, and then eggs. Okay, that's what it'll print out for the MVP. Everybody's going to see that. It would also be good for us to tell the user, to tell each player what their own personal score was. So let's get a hold of the scores. And we've done this a couple of times already. So we're going to loop over each player. So for each player, we're going to call this function. And it's going to get the player in. If scores player.name. Okay, so if they have any points at all, actually it'd probably be nicer if even if they don't have any points, even if they have 0 points, we should tell them that. So if they were playing the game, then we say echo. We echo to that player, so we're only going to write it to them. You found plus their scores player.name. Scores player.name is going to be their own score. Eggs. Okay. Now I will note that it will say if their score was 1, it will say you found 1 eggs. We could fix that with an if statement, but I won't do that right now because that's not very important. But it is a nice little touch. Okay, so we will loop through all of the players and tell them how many eggs that they personally got. All right, let us give that a try. So we should now see that information come up at the end. All right, make sure that we are standing, oh, let me refresh. Make sure I'm standing on the wool. And I start an egg hunt. Okay, and there's the chickens. I'm going to start collecting eggs. And let's see what happens once the 10 seconds is up for this game. Yellow has vanquished red 12-0. The MVP was Gremlin Seeker with 12 eggs. You found 12 eggs. That would of course be a lot more interesting if there were more players. But you know, since it's just me, at least I know that it worked. Okay, so when I was showing this off, you might have seen that cool scoreboard off to the side where it showed the scores as they were coming up in real time while playing the game. That was pretty cool, and I want to show you how to do that. There is a scoreboard module right here in minigames, and you can see that it's running these commands. So it's actually just using canary mod commands in order to update the scoreboard. I started by using this scoreboard module, ran into a couple of problems, so I just switched to running the commands, and that turned out to be a little bit easier for me. So let's do it that way. Now basically what we want is we want this function here. We're going to do just what that's doing. So I can actually even copy and paste that over here. Okay, so I pasted that in there, and now we're going to set up the scoreboard. Okay, so you can find this stuff out just by looking at the help in Minecraft. Let's take a look. So if I say help scoreboard, you can see what it does. Scoreboard objectives, players, teams. So I can say scoreboard objectives. Okay, and you can see you can do list, add, remove, set display. So by just looking at this information that it gives you when you run the commands in Minecraft, you can figure out what to do. And that is how I figured this out. So let's say when we're setting it up, we want to do scoreboard objectives, add, egg hunt, dummy. I got that out of the Scriptcraft scoreboard module. And then we give it the display name, egg hunt, like that. So that creates the objective that people are doing. Scoreboard objectives, set display, sidebar. Okay, so by setting the display of the sidebar, that's what's going to show up on the side when people are playing egg hunt. That's what allows people to see what's going on in real time. And we have two teams specifically, scoreboard, teams add red, and another one, scoreboard of teams add yellow. Okay, so we have created our objective and we've put it in the sidebar and we set up a red team and a yellow team. So the next thing we need to do is when the scores are updated, we need to update the scoreboard. So where that was happening was in our item pickup hook, right? This is where we're updating the scores. So we will also exec command scoreboard players set plus player name. Okay, so for that player, we're going to set their score for the egg hunt objective. It's egg hunt plus score. Okay, so scoreboard player set, and then whatever your username is, space egg hunt space, and then the score value. Okay, so that's enough to update the scoreboard along the way. The last thing we need to do is when we finish the game, we need to clean up our scoreboard. So let's do that here. Exec command scoreboard objectives remove egg hunt, because we're done with the egg hunt objective. Command scoreboard teams remove red, because we're done with the red team. Exec command scoreboard teams remove yellow, because we're also done with the yellow team. Okay, so that should be all we need to do to get our scoreboard set up and make it display and have it run with us. So let's give that a try. So I'm going to refresh as usual. Okay, and should be done refreshing right now. Start it up. There are the eggs. The eggs are coming out, and look at the scoreboard off to the side. And you can see it's counting up as I collect up the eggs. That is just what we wanted. Game should be over in seconds. Okay, the game is over, and the scoreboard is gone. Just what we wanted. So there is one last thing to do, and that is, the way I sort of envision this being used is you'd set up a red wool area and a yellow wool area, and that is where the players will start, but that you didn't want the chickens to just randomly start wherever the person who runs the egg hunt command is, because what if that person is playing? So you want the chickens to show up in some other spot. Now, how do we set that spot? Well, what we want to do is we want to set the spot using a command, and then we want that spot to be saved. All right, so Scriptcraft, if we go to the documentation for Scriptcraft, it has this notion of plugins, and plugins, let's see, or it has the notion of a plugin, I should say, way down here somewhere. Well, There we go. The plugin function. So the plugin function should be used to declare a JavaScript module whose state you want to have managed by Scriptcraft. So basically what it does is Scriptcraft can automatically save and load information for you. And that's what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a plugin called Egg Hunt. Okay, so Egg Hunt, and the name is Egg Hunt. And then we give it an object, and this object contains the stuff we want to store. Okay, so it's only going to store whatever is stored in the variable in that object called store. Okay, so there's an object, and in that object is store, and store is what stores the information. So we'll give it an empty object to start with, but we're going to put stuff in there. And then we use true to say that it's persistent. That means it's going to actually save and load that information for us. And this is all documented in the Scriptcraft API documentation. So again, that's why it's useful to read the docs, because they will tell you what you need to know to do cool stuff like this. Okay, so if you pass in a parameter, so if the first parameter is the word save, so if you run egg hunt space save, then we want to save the location of the player at that point in time. Okay, so we're going to save it to egghunt.store.chickenspot. Okay, so that's the name of the variable that we're going to have Scriptcraft save for us is chicken spot. Equals player.location. Now, an object like this you can't just put on disk because objects they're just information in memory in your computer. And when you're saving them to disk, you need to put them into some kind of string form, some kind of just simple form that can be stored. And so we just say toString. And that will give us a value that can be stored. And then let's tell the player location saved, just so that they know that we've actually done what they asked us to. And we're not going to start a game because we are just saving the location. Oh, plugin is not defined. Yes, indeed it's not. It is a global plugin. There we go. Okay, so now we need to actually use that location that we have saved. So right here, where we're spawning the chickens, we will say that the location for those chickens is going to start off being player.location. Okay. So if they haven't saved a location, we'll just use the player location. However, if egghunt.store.chickenspot, okay, so if there is something in egghunt.store.chickenspot, then the location is going to be location.fromString, and this is again something that I got from the Canary mod documentation, is that there's a from string, egghunt.store.chickenspot. Okay, so it will create a location object out of that string that we stored in chickenspot. Okay, so that means it's going to set a location to spawn the chickens based on what we had saved previously. And I think with this, our game will be done. Let's give it a try and see if we can do this. Okay. And we'll refresh to get our latest code. All right, and then what we're going to do is we want to let's go way over here, just so we can see for sure that something happened. And over here, we're going to say egg hunt save. And it said location saved. That's what we expected. Now we walk back to our yellow wool. Make sure we're standing on that. Okay, and JSP egg hunt start, or egg hunt, and we should see the chickens come up a ways away now. A little ways away. Whoop! We got an error. Okay. Oh yes, I see. Okay, so what was our error? Our error was a type error, no such function from string on that line. So let's take a look over here. So we called this from string. This was my mistake. Basically, I said location. So player.location is this object, and basically that location object isn't what has from string. It's actually on the location class, which is part of canary mod. So we need to actually use an uppercase L location, which is not defined. We will get that up here, just like we got these other things. So location equals packages.net.canarymod.api.entity, because we want to create a new location. We're not trying to use an existing location, or not API entity, sorry, it's API world position location. Okay, so that is the location class, because we want to be able to create a new location object from this location string. Now, object-oriented programming is what that's called, where you have classes and objects, and it's kind of complicated. It's got its own lingo. This is what we need to do. All right, let's give that a try. So our location was saved successfully. Let's see, refresh. So we did successfully save our location. So we don't need to resave our location. We should actually see those chickens come up somewhere in that direction. Let's try it and see if they do. Yes, there they are. See, their chickens are all off in the distance there instead of where they were. And now you can see my score is going up, and I'm collecting points. And the game is over, and I got 14 eggs. Pretty cool. All right. So I'll note that, we set a game length of 10 seconds. That doesn't seem like enough. You might want more chickens depending on how many people are playing. You can just modify all these parameters. Just modify these variables up at the top, and you can change the way the chicken game or the egg hunt game plays. You could actually make those parameters to the egg hunt command if you wanted to, and you could make the first parameter be how long is the game, and the second parameter is how many chickens do you want. So that way you don't have to change the code. There are a whole bunch of things you could do with this, and hopefully it gives you the idea that there's a lot more that you can do with these scripts. You could actually make little mini games. So this script is pretty complicated. It's 171 lines. There's a lot of code there. It's doing a lot of different things. It's using a lot of different concepts from JavaScript. It's bridging across to Java. It's integrating almost everything we did except for the drone. It's doing for loops and while loops and functions. I don't expect people to be able to just start writing scripts like this right away. It takes a lot of experimentation and a lot of learning, and there's going to be a lot of other resources. But I wanted to give you an idea of what's possible, and I wanted to give you an idea of the kinds of places to look for the kinds of functions you need to be able to do these things. And hopefully you'll be able to work through it and find some things and find some fun games you can make for yourself.